The chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with light from 1,000 crystalline displays, each showing the faces of delegates from across the stars. They had gathered to discuss war, its inevitability, and its use as a tool of dominance. For most of them, war was an art, a necessity, even a point of pride. When the discussion turned toward Earth, the mood shifted to amusement. One by one, speakers took the floor, their tones dripping with mockery. They spoke of humans as though they were a curiosity, a strange little species obsessed with talk and treaties, terrified of the very concept of battle. Humans are afraid of war, one counselor declared, his words sparking laughter across the assembly. They preach diplomacy because they lack the strength to endure conflict. Their history of negotiations, peace treaties, and ceasefires proves what they are, creatures desperate to avoid the battlefield. The laughter spread, echoing through the vast hall. A chorus of alien voices chimed in, each adding to the ridicule. One described humanity as children hiding behind words instead of weapons. Another compared their fear of war to a predator that bares its teeth but refuses to strike. They recalled incidents where human ambassadors had attempted to mediate conflicts between empires far stronger than their own, and they twisted those efforts into tales of cowardice rather than restraint. Every insult built a picture of humanity as fragile, incapable of matching the iron wills of the warrior species that dominated the stars. Delegates smirked as they recalled how humans avoided expansion wars, choosing to fortify their homeworld instead of pressing outward. To the council, it was proof enough: Earth was a place of farmers and talkers, not conquerors. In the midst of this storm of laughter, the human representative sat still. A single figure among hundreds, hands folded, expression unreadable. He did not rise to defend his people, nor did he show offense. He simply observed, letting the mockery roll over him like waves against stone. His silence only seemed to encourage the others. They mistook it for agreement, for submission. One elder counselor leaned forward and spoke with authority, driving the mockery into an official stance. Humans will remain under supervision. Their fear is a safeguard. They will never dare challenge the natural order of the galaxy. They lack claws, fangs, or firepower, and they cling to peace as their only shield. His declaration was met with a roar of approval. The council chamber became a theater of arrogance. Delegates raised their voices, some proposing to limit human influence further, others suggesting that humans could serve as mediators precisely because they were too timid to pose a threat. The notion of humans as a buffer, harmless and eager to please, gained traction quickly. Every word was meant to diminish them, to confine them to a role of weakness. And yet, in the quiet presence of the human delegate, there was no visible protest. He allowed the insults to shape the council's judgment, allowed their confidence to build unchecked. His stillness carried an energy of its own, subtle and unreadable, but the aliens were too blinded by laughter to notice. The council's decision was finalized that day with pride. Humanity was labeled a peace-bound species, bound not by choice but by fear. They believed that humans, when faced with war, would fold, bow, and retreat. They wrote it into their records, sealed it as fact. The galaxy would accept it as truth, a law as clear as gravity itself. When the session ended, delegates left satisfied, congratulating one another on their clever assessments. They believed they had uncovered humanity's nature and trapped it in words. Only the human remained seated a moment longer, eyes fixed on the chamber's towering ceiling. His lips curved in the faintest of smiles, gone before anyone could notice. In their arrogance, the council had convinced themselves that fear of war was proof of weakness. They had forgotten the possibility that fear could be born not of ignorance, but of memory. They did not ask why humans sought peace so desperately, nor what history had carved that longing into their bones. They assumed fear meant fragility. They never considered that fear could be a warning, an echo of scars older than the stars they governed. The human representative finally rose, collected his documents, and walked from the chamber without a word. To the council, he was leaving in silence because there was nothing to say. But in truth, he carried their arrogance with him, storing every insult, every dismissal, every decree. The silence was not surrender. It was patience. The galaxy had made its judgment, and humanity had let them. The stage was set, though no one in that chamber yet realized how costly their laughter would become. Tension began to spread across the galaxy when a neutral colony near the border of two empires was suddenly attacked. It was not a military outpost, not a staging ground, but a settlement where merchants, explorers, and scientists from many worlds coexisted. Among them were thousands of human civilians, living under the assumption that neutrality meant safety. That illusion shattered when fleets descended without warning, reducing homes and stations to debris. Distress signals reached the Council almost immediately, but they were dismissed as background noise of yet another border dispute. The urgency of human pleas was drowned beneath the arrogance of those who considered Earth too insignificant to protect. The human delegation stood before the Council once again, their words heavy with controlled anger. They demanded accountability, called for intervention, and insisted that an attack on innocence could not be ignored. Their warnings were sharp, carrying the weight of both principle and resolve. Yet the chamber responded with smirks and laughter, as though their outrage was a comedy. The Council declared that human protests were dramatic exaggerations, that they were overreacting to a minor incident. Their cries for justice were painted as further proof of weakness. One voice among the alien generals summed up the mood with mocking certainty. "You speak as if you have claws to bear," he sneered. "But all you have are words. Your kind hides behind treaties because you have nothing else." The statement drew approving nods from across the chamber. For them, humanity's appeal for peace was nothing but cowardice dressed in fine language. The human representative refused to retreat. His voice did not waver as he gave a final warning. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness. Do not assume that our patience has no end. If you push us past it, you will learn that the cost of your arrogance will be greater than you imagine." The words cut through the air, and for a fleeting moment the council chamber fell into silence. Yet the weight of that warning quickly dissolved in laughter, the sound echoing off the crystalline walls. To the majority, it was unthinkable that such fragile beings could ever follow through on such a threat. Behind the council's dismissal, events continued to spiral. The aggressor empire, emboldened by the council's inaction, pressed further. Human colonies on the edge of their influence were struck next, supply stations raided, outposts burned. Refugees streamed toward Earth's core systems, carrying stories of slaughter and ruin. To the rest of the galaxy, it was background static, the natural consequence of being too weak to defend one's holdings. To humanity, it was a wound that cut deeper with every life lost. Earth responded first with diplomacy, reaching out to the Council again, offering mediation, proposing ceasefires, seeking any path to stop the bloodshed without more death. Their words were calm, but beneath them was steel. Yet every attempt was dismissed. The councillors shook their heads and laughed at the predictability of it all. Of course the humans would beg for talks. Of course they would plead instead of fight. It confirmed everything the council already believed. When another wave of attacks struck deeper, when entire convoys were destroyed in cold blood, the human delegation stood before the council one final time. Their request was simple: stop the aggressors before the damage became irreversible. But the assembly had already decided. They saw no need to waste fleets on what they called human dramatics. One delegate even mocked openly, declaring that humanity should be grateful the council had tolerated them at all. Their dismissal was not only careless but cruel, each word a spark tossed onto dry kindling. In that moment, the choice was sealed. The humans walked out of the chamber, not in defeat, but in grim acceptance. Their patience had been tested and finally broken. They had offered peace with sincerity, had given every chance to avoid escalation, and each time their hand was slapped away. Now, they would answer in a language the galaxy had forgotten they could speak. The aggressors believed they had struck fear deep into human hearts. The council believed they had forced Earth into submission with ridicule. Both were blind to the truth. Humanity had been holding back not because they could not fight, but because they knew exactly what war meant. They understood better than anyone what it would cost, and they had hoped, desperately, that it could be avoided. But now the choice had been made for them. War was coming, and for the first time the galaxy would see what humanity's fear truly concealed. The first human fleets that emerged from hyperspace were not what the galaxy expected. They were not massive armadas, not endless swarms of vessels like those deployed by the old warrior empires. Instead, they were compact, sleek, and lethal, each ship carrying the aura of purpose rather than spectacle. The aggressor empire laughed at the sight of them, boasting that humanity had arrived with fishing boats against war cruisers. Their laughter ended within hours. The first engagement was not a drawn-out exchange but a demonstration of precision. Human ships moved with eerie coordination, striking at command vessels, crippling communication arrays, and tearing apart supply carriers with surgical efficiency. Where alien fleets relied on overwhelming firepower, humanity relied on speed, intelligence, and ruthlessness. They did not waste energy on dramatic shows of force. Every strike was calculated to collapse the enemy's ability to respond. When the dust settled, an entire formation of warships lay in ruins while the humans withdrew with almost no losses. Reports flooded the council chamber, each one more unbelievable than the last. Alien admirals struggled to make sense of what had happened. For centuries, they had dismissed Earth as a quiet backwater clinging to diplomacy because it lacked the will to fight. Yet what they witnessed was not desperation, but mastery. Humanity had not forgotten war. They had studied it, refined it, and hidden its lessons behind a veil of restraint. The aggressor empire doubled its efforts, deploying larger fleets, boasting that the first victory had been a trick. Again, humanity answered. Their ships did not match numbers with numbers. Instead, they exploited every weakness, targeting logistics, fuel depots, and reinforcement routes. Alien crews found themselves cut off, stranded, their morale collapsing as broadcasts filled their comms, recordings of their defeats played back to them by human intelligence units. The psychological weight was crushing. Soldiers who once mocked the thought of facing humans now surrendered before battles had even begun. Whispers spread across the galaxy. Delegates who had laughed at humanity's supposed fear began to fall silent. Spy networks uncovered fragments of Earth's history. Wars that spanned centuries, conflicts that consumed continents, battles fought with fire, steel, and unimaginable endurance. Humanity's obsession with peace was revealed for what it truly was, not weakness, but a desperate attempt to avoid repeating the horrors they already knew too well. They had lived through nightmares no alien empire had endured, and from those fires they had forged doctrines designed not for show, but for survival. An alien strategist put it into words that chilled every ear that heard it. They are not afraid of war. They are afraid of unleashing what they have built to survive it. That realization arrived too late for the enemies now locked against them. On the battlefield, humanity pressed further. Entire fleets were dismantled not by brute force but by cutting away their ability to function. Planetary defenses that once stood unchallenged collapsed after targeted strikes left them blind and starved of reinforcements. Alien commanders, long accustomed to straightforward clashes of strength, found themselves playing against an opponent that treated war like a game of chess where every piece, every move, was calculated 10 steps ahead. One decisive moment cemented the truth for all who doubted. A coalition fleet of nearly 200 ships confronted less than 50 human vessels. By every known measure, the outcome should have been certain. But humanity rewrote certainty. Within hours, the coalition was annihilated, their command structure shattered, their vessels drifting as lifeless husks in the void. Survivors whispered that the humans seemed to know every maneuver before it was executed, as if the battle had been played out 1,000 times in simulations before it ever began. The council chambers fell into uneasy silence as the reports grew. Those who had once called humans cowards now avoided eye contact when their names were spoken. The arrogance that had filled the chamber weeks earlier had been replaced with a growing dread. The laughter was gone, replaced with questions none dared answer. How long had Earth prepared in silence? How much of their strength had been hidden behind diplomacy? And the most chilling question of all, if this was only the beginning, what would happen when humanity stopped holding back entirely? For the aggressor empire, the answer came swiftly. Their fleets were broken, their supply chains shattered, their borders crumbling under relentless pressure. Humanity did not pursue glory, did not pause to boast or threaten. They advanced with the cold efficiency of a species that understood war not as spectacle, but as survival. Every victory was not celebrated but recorded, another step in a campaign designed to ensure that the enemy would never rise again. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the truth became undeniable. Humanity had never feared war because they were weak. They feared it because they knew better than anyone the cost of unleashing it. But once forced into it, once patience was stripped away, they became something no empire could stand against. Humanity did not pause after its first decisive victories. Where other species might have hesitated, negotiating from a position of new strength, humanity advanced with precision and certainty. Their fleets spread across multiple fronts, striking in ways that seemed impossible to predict. Enemy strongholds that had stood untouched for centuries crumbled in days. What the aggressors once considered unassailable fortresses were revealed to be brittle when faced with opponents who fought not for conquest but for absolute survival. The humans began dismantling more than ships and garrisons. They attacked the spine of the enemy empire. Communications relays went dark, severing commands before they could reach the battlefield. Refineries and depots erupted into fire, leaving fleets adrift without fuel. Convoys vanished into silence, intercepted and dismantled before they reached their destinations. The war was no longer about direct engagements. It became a systematic destruction of every structure the aggressors relied on. What terrified observers most was the psychological campaign that accompanied the strikes. Human fleets broadcast their victories across open channels, not with boasts or threats, but with cold evidence. Images of burning warships, transmissions of defeated admirals surrendering, recordings of terrified soldiers begging for mercy, all were delivered directly into the enemy's own networks. Entire crews mutinied before fighting began, refusing to face an opponent who seemed to haunt them even before shots were fired. The council chambers, once filled with arrogant laughter, became a place of dread as reports arrived daily. Delegates watched feeds of human ships cutting through fleets 3 times their size. They heard intercepted messages of enemy soldiers whispering that resistance was pointless, that to fight humans was to die. Generals who once mocked Earth as harmless now sat in silence, unable to deny what unfolded before their eyes. On the ground, humanity demonstrated a brutality that was not reckless, but deliberate. In occupied worlds, resistance cells armed by Earth struck relentlessly, coordinating with surgical precision. Garrisons collapsed under sabotage, supply caches detonated from within, and communication centers were seized overnight. Where the enemy had relied on intimidation to control populations, humanity turned that fear against them. Civilians who had once cowered under the shadow of imperial fleets now rose in rebellion, emboldened by the certainty that humanity would not abandon them. The aggressor empire, desperate to regain control, attempted to regroup for one decisive stand. They gathered what remained of their might at a heavily fortified sector, confident that sheer numbers and entrenched defenses would halt humanity's advance. Instead, their preparations became their undoing. Human fleets did not attack the fortress directly. They cut its supply arteries, isolated it from reinforcements, and unleashed a barrage of electronic warfare that left entire systems blind. When the final assault came, it was not a battle but an execution. The stronghold collapsed in a matter of hours, its defenders scattering into the void. The galaxy understood then that humanity was not simply winning, they were erasing the enemy's capacity to recover. Every strike was chosen with precision to ensure the Empire's power could not rise again. Species that once laughed at Earth now whispered that this was more than war. It was a lesson carved into the stars. Humanity was ensuring that future generations would inherit not just defeat, but a memory so sharp it would deter them for centuries. Even as surrender envoys began to emerge, humanity did not immediately halt. They pressed forward, ensuring no corner of resistance remained. Their fleets burned outposts, dismantled shipyards, and seized databanks to ensure nothing could be rebuilt. Every step was methodical, every decision guided by a purpose beyond vengeance. This was not rage. It was resolve, sharpened into a weapon and wielded with terrifying calm. Other species began to plead with the humans, begging for restraint, urging them to accept surrender and move on. But Earth had made its choice. Too many lives had been lost, too many warnings ignored, too many insults endured. Peace had been offered and mocked. Now there would be no half measures, no compromises. The enemy would not just be defeated, they would be broken so thoroughly that no council, no empire, and no arrogant delegate would ever again believe humanity was afraid. In the aftermath of each campaign, the silence was more haunting than the battles themselves. Human fleets did not linger to celebrate or to raise flags. They left behind wreckage, ashes, and memories that spread like wildfire across the stars. Soldiers spoke of them not as opponents, but as nightmares that could not be resisted. Empires that once viewed Earth as insignificant now studied every report with dread, realizing the truth too late. What began as laughter had become terror. Humanity's war was not driven by conquest or greed, but by necessity. And when necessity forced them into the fire, they burned brighter and hotter than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Galactic Council gathered in emergency session, but the chamber that had once rung with arrogance now sat in uneasy silence. Delegates avoided one another's gaze as reports were projected into the air, shattered fleets, colonies burning, once proud generals kneeling before human commanders. Every display carried the same truth. The empire that had mocked and provoked Earth was gone, broken beyond recognition. Not even the most stubborn voice dared deny it. The laughter that had filled these halls weeks earlier was replaced by fear too heavy to disguise. When the human representative entered, no one mocked, no one whispered. He carried no escort, no grand announcement, only a presence that froze the chamber. He stood at the center, eyes scanning the assembly, the same eyes that had endured their scorn when they called his people cowards. Now those same delegates shifted uncomfortably, their pride stripped away by the weight of what humanity had unleashed. His words were not shouted. They were measured, deliberate, each one carrying more weight than any weapon. You said humans are afraid of war. You were correct. We fear it because we know it too well. We fear it because we have drowned in it, bled in it, and clawed our way out of it. Our history is not written in victories of conquest, but in scars that taught us what war truly costs. He paused, letting silence settle like a blade at their throats. That fear is why we chose diplomacy, why we sought peace. We gave you every chance to avoid this. We asked, we warned, we offered restraint. You dismissed our patience as weakness. You mistook mercy for fragility. And so, when war came, you learned what that fear was hiding. The chamber remained still, no delegate daring to interrupt. Screens above their heads still displayed the wreckage of broken empires, the flames of cities once loyal to the aggressors. It was not simply a reminder of human strength, but of what happened when arrogance pushed too far. The representative continued, voice steady and unyielding. Understand this, our fear was never for ourselves. It was for you. Because when war is forced upon us, we do not stop until the threat is ended. We do not fight for glory, nor conquest, but survival. And survival has no limit. You called us weak. You called us children hiding behind words. But it was you who failed to see the truth. Words were the shield that kept you safe from us. Several delegates lowered their heads, ashamed, while others simply trembled. The memory of their laughter seemed obscene now, a relic of ignorance. They had mocked Earth because they believed peace meant fragility. They had never considered that peace had been a choice, one they had squandered. The surrender of the aggressor empire was formalized before the council. Every surviving fleet, every colony, every stronghold was yielded unconditionally to humanity's oversight. No terms were offered, no negotiations permitted. It was total, absolute submission. The council did not question it. They knew there was no other option. But the representative was not finished. His voice cut through the hall one final time. We did not seek this war. We did not want this war. But we answered it because you left us no choice. Remember what you have seen here. Remember what your arrogance cost. Do not mistake our silence again. We will not threaten, we will not boast. We will simply act. And when we act, nothing you build will survive if you force our hand. The words settled like a brand on the minds of every delegate. They understood then that humanity's quiet was not submission but restraint. The galaxy would never laugh at Earth again, not because humans demanded respect, but because they had carved the memory of their power into the bones of empires. As the session ended, the human representative turned and left without waiting for response. He did not need applause or acknowledgement. The point had been made in fire and silence. Behind him, the chamber remained hushed, delegates sitting frozen, haunted by what they had heard and what they had seen. The galaxy would recover in time, but it would never forget. Generations would inherit the story of how Earth, mocked as timid, revealed itself as the most dangerous force among the stars. And in that story would linger the line that no one would ever erase: humans fear war, because they know exactly what it brings. But if forced to fight, they will ensure that fear becomes the nightmare of anyone foolish enough to test them.